The Secrets of Star Wars is brought to you by the Star Quest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give.
You're listening to The Secrets of Star Wars, episode 37.
Hello there.
It's a power that Jedi have that lets them control people and make things float.
Impressive. Every word in that sentence was wrong.
Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're my only hope.
This station is now the ultimate power in the universe.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
It's against my programming to impersonate a deity.
That's not how the Force works.
Force is with me, and I am with the Force, and I fear nothing.
Remember, the Force will be with you, always.
Hey everybody, I'm Father Andrew Kinstetter, aka Father Fett, and you're listening to The Secrets of Star Wars, where we talk about everything connected to that galaxy far, far away, including the deeper themes and meanings, all from a Catholic point of view. Today we're continuing our discussion on the connections and lore of the Mandalorian culture as seen in the animated series The Clone Wars. And today we are going to be discussing Season 3, Episode 10, Heroes on Both Sides, and Season 4, Episode 14, entitled A Friend in Need. And so joining me today on the panel are, first up, it's Mike Creevy. Hey, Mike.
Hey, Father. It's good to be here.
Good to have you. And second this evening, we have Thomas Sanherho. Hey, Thomas.
Hey, Father. It's good to be here.
That is the group tonight to discuss these two episodes, so buckle up, because there's a bit of stuff more in the second episode, but we'll kind of get to that. So these two episodes are linked more or less kind of from a plot point of view. Some of the characters kind of overlap. They're not sequential by any means in terms of the release order, but Lux and Ahsoka are kind of the tie between the two. So that first episode, in fact, just has kind of a brief passing connection to Mandalore and to Mandalorian culture.
Yeah, I like the way it does that, where Mandalore's like the jumping point in that first one.
Yeah, it's used as just kind of the independent system that they're able to kind of smuggle through. But that's really the only kind of connection to Mandalorians at all that we see in that episode, and there's quite a bit more in that second episode. So to throw it to you guys, what were your impressions of this particular little story arc?
I like that it's all about Ahsoka. Ahsoka is one of the most interesting characters in the Clone Wars as it goes through. And you see her develop, and you see this resistance to what the Jedi are about, and this understanding of what war is. And these two episodes are really good episodes to set that up, and that growth that she goes through.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the, not spoiling anything, but just a couple important themes, that I'm sure will come up here in a little bit, but war and peace, just war, some of these things we've kind of covered in some of these episodes in this arc. But in particular, I think with this one, I just think it's interesting getting to see, like the Separatist Senate or just some of the things more from their angle, kind of, I use the word humanize, but we have lots of different species here, of course, for us human viewers, that idea of being able to get a little window behind kind of not just Dooku, but like what's it like on their side? What are some of their motivations? And just like with our own Civil War, the complex nature of when there's some old relationships that are now like I'm on this side and she's on that side, or that kind of thing. So that was kind of cool.
Yeah, actually, that's exactly where I was kind of, and I use the same word humanize in my notes as I talked about this. But both from the point of it humanizes the Separatists, but also in that second episode, there's a humanization of the droids even, as they're fixed by R2-D2. And I actually kind of found a connection. I don't know if it's really there or not, but between IG-11 and the Mandalorian, who sort of goes through his own redemption and, goes against what he was initially programmed to the droids in that second episode, where they're able to, they claim, or they tell R2-D2 that they're no longer battle droids anymore, and then fight with R2-D2.
Right.
Which was a simpler way of showing IG-11's story in a 20-minute Clone Wars episode.
Yep.
So yeah, I thought they were good about that. And again, and we'll get into this more, I'm sure, but just the fact that, when there is conflict and war and all of these sorts of things, we can't forget the human dignity of everyone. You know, your enemy is still made in the image and likeness of God. And so, you know, through the lens of Ahsoka, we sort of see her and her polarized viewpoint kind of soften as she goes through her arc in this story plot. So we'll kind of jump into that as we go along. So the first episode that we're going to look at is season 3, episode 10, Heroes on Both Sides. And one of the interesting things that as I was kind of doing some research on this is a subtle reference to the opening crawl of Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. And in that crawl, it says, there are heroes on both sides, evil is everywhere. So, you know, that's kind of a fun little Easter egg there.
And on that note, just real quick, because I was thinking that always bothered me a little bit in the crawl for Revenge of the Sith, because it's like, maybe I'm missing something, but what have you done in the movies to establish that? You know,
right.
Like it just seemed like kind of a random thing. So that was something I thought actually kind of closed the loop a little bit on that, which was
and
good.
It's one that's really interesting too when you think about the movies and the way that the droids are stand-ins. You know, they're a faceless enemy. They are meaningless. Killing them is not killing something. It's just destroying a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that doesn't get talked about more, but it is now, you know, as we're moving into the Mandalorian and we're seeing the IG-11 unit and then all these other droids that are getting more of a humanistic characteristic, it becomes an interesting thing to look at.
I'd also point out, too, that the clones are sort of the same thing on the opposite side. If you have just a bunch of clones, when you kill a clone, there's not really this sense of, you know, killing a person. You're just, you know, killing a number, you know, more or less. So...
Yeah, and you see that in that opening scene where they're talking in the Senate and they're arguing about, we need more money so that we can throw more clones at this problem, you know? It's like, wait a minute, hold on now. And it seems like the only two people that are concerned about that are the two senators that are arguing against this push to just open the banks for more clones.
Yep.
And I found that very enlightening for me. I've already kind of told you guys that this is kind of my introduction to the Clone Wars, is what we've been discussing. So to see Padme in her role has been really helpful to me, because the movies don't quite get into the depth of her character very much. Yeah. She's kind of the love interest of Anakin, and you know, that whole thing. But yeah, to see her, and I especially liked that opening scene where they are arguing about that. She is the one who kind of breaks out and makes the comment. She says, you know, they're all talking about the fiscal aspect and the money and we need to deregulate the banks in order to finance more clones, and she comes out and she says, saying nothing of fiscal responsibility, what about moral responsibility? And so she is trying to cut through all of the politics of it and point towards just the human nature, the moral responsibility that they have in this war, and that was very, very good for me to see in her character.
Well, and it reminds me a little bit of, I'm just looking here, I forget what year it came out, 2010, Under the Roman Sky, the Pope Pius XII movie with, what's his name? James Cromwell. It was Cromwell. I'm thinking I was just doing a read through some of the English Reformation, so there's a lot of Cromwells in that, of course. But did you guys see that one? He plays Pius XII.
No, I haven't seen that one.
It's pretty good, but at one point he's got this German officer that he keeps kind of like having these run-ins with, and the officer's really, I don't remember if he's an SS officer. I think he's a German military commander. But at one point he's giving his typical sort of, you know, speech and everything, and up till now Pius XII has been kind of reserved, a little, you know, quiet and but strong. And he starts to say something about, like, I'm a soldier, and then, like, the Pope just screams at him. And he's like, no! And, like, the whole scene, you just don't expect it. And he's looking at him, he's like, you are a man! You know, and just to stop everything, it's like, you know, drop all this, you know, this duty, that duty, this political thing. Like, what's the right thing for you to do right now? Like, you're not going to be able to stand before God and be like, well, I was a good German officer or a good American officer. You know, so I thought that there's a little bit of some of that in this too, that with her approach there, like, everybody just pause for a second. Like, what are we doing? You know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they're already, even within the debate, setting up those opposing views. You've got Bail Organa and Padme who are fighting to try to do what's moral and right. And then you have all the other, I mean, of course, the Techno Union, the Trade Federation, the Bacon Clan, all concerned about their profits and everything. But even within the Senate, there was a point where they kind of break out into arguing again when Padme introduces the idea that they could negotiate. And they're already setting up that one of the senators says you can't negotiate with those animals. Yeah. And so there was this already a very clear, we see them as less than human. Mm-hmm. And so Padme is trying to, reverse that thought.
Well, it's interesting because you also look at that, the American Civil War. There's, I'm one of those, but I go back in history and I look at the presidents for what they were. And I have a real issue with Lincoln at points where his goal was to win at all costs. It did not matter. He needed to squash the rebellion, and he was willing to do that by firing generals that wouldn't listen to him and do the things that needed to be done. And it was effective. And a lot of times we kind of hold him on a pedestal because of the good things that came from that. But at the same time, there were a lot of really bad things that came from that. And being a person who was born in Atlanta, raised in the South, that's an undercurrent of everything that happens there. And, I was not a part of any of the oppression, obviously, and my family is immigrant on top of that. So that's kind of another layer to everything. But it is something to look at, and you see here that there's this push for win at all costs and just go and throw the whole bank at it. And it's very, because it's a kid's show, it's like very in your face, this like whole techno union and banking thing. But there really isn't much of a difference between that and what happens in the real world, where the industrial complex gets moving with it. And they're like, well, yeah, let's keep the tanks rolling, keep the planes coming off the line because we're making money while we're doing this.
Yeah, and you touch on a crucial point of Catholic moral theology, that the ends don't justify the means.
Exactly.
When we choose to pursue, any of those sorts of things, you can't do evil in order to cause something good to happen.
Right.
So, and of course, the Trade Federation and the Techno Union and Banking Clan are all, they're already corrupt anyway. So none of this is even coming into their mind. They just want the profit.
Right.
So,
well, they're obviously playing both sides of the war too, which is, that's not as much of a real world thing. Most often, most of the time, there's not like a real corporation that's actually sitting on both sides of the combat. But at the same time, there are people that are willing to step into that space and to prolong the war because it benefits them.
Mm-hmm. And we bring of course, the spiritual element too, of just the fact that we know as contextual fans, of course, that this whole thing is orchestrated by kind of the devil.
Right.
Very directly, he's absolutely, got this galactic wide plan, so that's tough too when you're watching people having cocktails and trying to talk this through. And I'm sitting there like, oh, darn, like I want to jump in there and just kind of tell you guys what I know. Like there's so much more going on here. Oh man.
Just don't bring it to Palpatine. Go somewhere else with it.
Please
just
stop
for this
going
time.
to him. Yeah.
Well, and then too, I think the whole crux of the Clone Wars series is to watch the Jedi try and humanize the clones. Like that's their whole objective, is fighting with the clones. They keep trying to give them a voice, keep trying to give them a personality. And it makes the betrayal of them at the end so much more impactful. When you actually go through and think of this, and then Order 66 happens and you're like, oh, it's so horrible because they actually valued these guys and now they're completely turning their backs on them. But that's not the way it was for everyone, because everyone wasn't on the front line with them.
Right.
And we see in Star Wars Rebels that not all the clones turned on the Jedi either, which is helpful.
And they address some of that in Clone Wars, but I'm excited again with this upcoming, at the time of this recording, this upcoming new season, that there's been, I've heard a few things where they haven't given away too much, but that some of it's going to be contemporaneous with Order 66 and stuff like that too, possibly.
Cool.
So yeah, I don't know how they'll do that or how much of it, but that'll be neat.
Oh, they have never had any respect for timelines, so
Right.
I don't doubt that happening.
Yeah. Well, jumping back into the recap here, we kind of already talked about that the Trade Federation, the Techno Union, the Bacon Clan all try to come up with this plan to make the war feel closer to home so they can cause the Senate to vote to continue funding the war because the Senate had tabled that emergency bill. And we switch to Padme, who's urging Anakin to go speak to the Jedi Council, to speak to the Chancellor about this. And we are brought to Ahsoka, who just doesn't seem to see the point of trying to negotiate with the Separatists. You know, she sees the Separatists as evil and doesn't understand the politics behind it and can't figure out what's going on. And Anakin tries to clarify the situation for her. And I found this very, very like Anakin. He says, the Separatists think the Republic is corrupt and they're wrong, and we have to restore order. And I immediately thought, that sounds like very much something Darth Vader is definitely going to do. Restore order, and we have to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I brought peace and security to my new empire. Like, oh no.
The fist of the Emperor, man. That's but it's interesting because you see this character that is really developing into this black and white. And I don't know, the Jedi are so interesting when you look at them this way, because they espouse this black and white, but at the same time, the really good ones, like Ahsoka and what she ends up becoming, and like Qui-Gon, were more willing to look at each situation as a gray, I'm not really sure where this is going to go, but I'm going to trust the Force and move with it. And not to say, this is bad, this is good, this is bad, this is good, and just categorize everything. And you see Anakin falling away from Obi-Wan's lessons, that Obi-Wan must have been giving him these lessons, because that's Obi-Wan's thing. Is like Obi-Wan's like, very relaxed about the way that he moves, and he just kind of follows the tendencies of the Force around him. And you see Anakin's not picking up that part of the lessons. He's very much a black and white, this is wrong, this is right, and everything fits into neat little categories.
Keep going back to that line from like a few episodes ago, the whole like the stabbing the guy through the back. What? He was going to blow up the ship.
Right?
Just like that really summarizes so much.
Right. Right. And he has to control it.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So, but even in that moment in the episode, Padme sort of like sees that, and she pulls Ahsoka away from Anakin and decides to teach her about politics and all of this away from Anakin. And so they start to talk, and Padme laments that she wants to talk to her friend, who's also a senator, Senator Bonteri, who is a separatist now, and that Padme can't actually meet with her officially because it's illegal. It would legitimize the separatists according to the Republic. And so then that's where they concoct this plan to use Ahsoka to get Ahsoka, because Ahsoka can travel to neutral worlds. So they're going to use Ahsoka to smuggle Padme through Mandalore, which is a neutral world, where they will board a cargo ship and they will head to one of the separatist systems. And that's where they're going to go to Raxus, which is where Senator Bonteri is located at. We quickly then switch to General Grievous, who confirms his mission, and he with Count Dooku, and that he's about to deploy the infiltrator droids. And he's talking to them, and again, this is sort of like a human thing. He tells the droids that they're not going to return, and not to let that get in their way. And I was sort of thinking, well, if they're droids, they should just be programmed. Like, it wouldn't matter if they have this fear of not returning or not.
Like Henry V's speech before they go into battle. Like,
well, but then what you see them do, like, they're actually designed not to return. Like, that's the whole point of the droids, is like, you're not coming back. Very clearly, that is not your objective.
Right. So he gives them the pep talk, and then they turn into what looks like cleaning droids, and they head off to be delivered to Coruscant. We turn back to Padme and Ahsoka, who have made it to Raxus to meet up with Senator Bonteri. And we're again, I appreciate this about the Clone Wars, and I sort of don't appreciate this about the Clone Wars, is the fact that it is a kids show, and so some of this is like just incredibly in your face and obvious. And I get that, and I understand that, and it's great for kids. Being 30, I sort of like a little more subtlety. But they meet with Senator Bonteri, and Ahsoka is visibly surprised. And Senator Bonteri Ahsoka asks her, "You're a Separatist?" And Bonteri says, "Of course, dear. What were you expecting?" As if,
right, like, am I supposed to have horns? And even if I didn't have horns, what would that mean? Because there's a whole race of people that has horns growing out of their heads.
Right.
What am I supposed to look like?
You were supposed to look like an evil monster, but
mustache twirling, something, yeah.
Well, right. But then on the turn of that, think of the, later when she's talking to Lux, Lux asks if she'd met any Separatists before, and the only two people she's met that are Separatists are Dooku and Asajj Ventress, and those are the only two non-droid figures that she's met, because I don't even think at this point she's met Grievous. I'm not sure, but
I think she mentions that she's met Grievous, but I could be wrong.
But even with those two, even if you add him in, that's even worse, because I mean he's horrendous. But those are terrible examples of people to represent the actual other side of the faces on the other side beyond the droids.
Well, that's something I think they even did really well in The Force Awakens. Because going back and rewatching that before the new movie, it was a good 2/3 of the way through it before Adam Driver takes the helmet off, and it's in the context of Rey, sternly referring to him as a creature in a mask. He just abruptly stands up and takes it off, and it's like, Andy Samberg? Like when I first saw it, I was like, no, it looks like Josh Groban. Like, there's all these like he's not what you'd expect. He doesn't yet have a huge scar, or he's not doesn't have red eyes. It was kind of like, okay, this guy doesn't really look threatening necessarily. So what's his deal? So of course he is a bad guy then for most of the movies, but still, it was just, that was another little, I thought, similar kind of thing there. If you're at least getting you to think about maybe there's more to this than I realized, it's a good plot device, I think.
Well, and Ahsoka is committing one of the, and it's been a while since I've been in philosophy, but one of the fallacies of equating her encounter, her experience with, one or two or three, she's equating them with the entire group of the Separatists. Mm-hmm. Which is totally a wrong way to approach things, and she discovers that.
It's a genetic fallacy, right? I think that's what it's called.
I would have to go back to my notes. It's been a while.
Yeah, I think that's what it's called.
Well, and even my I was deployed to Iraq in 2008, but my brother was deployed before and after me, and it's very common to have some truly sick, twisted, evil people who are truly just very dark, who are paying a deeply impoverished local guy without any education, who doesn't really know maybe what's going on in the world, any of that, say, hey, we'll pay you X amount, or we'll take care of your family if you go plant this bomb, or we know such and such about you, and if you don't go plant this bomb, we'll tell everybody else, blackmail, all the things that can, it is a huge, horrible mess, and it's not easy to just, okay, they're all like that. They're never all like that. Ever.
Right.
In any war ever. So, yeah, that's complicated.
Yeah, and I think this episode tried to highlight that.
Yeah.
And I think they did a really good job with it.
Well, and I love the fact that they bring up even what the Separatists don't like about the Republic. And it's exactly the thing that we just saw we don't like about the Republic. That's like, oh, yeah, that's totally, the corporations have kind of taken over and are kind of running the show there. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And Ahsoka is introduced to Lux, Mina's son, which was interesting because his name is Lux, which is Latin for light.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just kind of toyed with that just a little bit, but I'm wondering if that was, his role to shine light on Ahsoka's ignorance in this episode. I don't know if that's at all what they intended, but that was sort of, when I heard that name and I read that name on the closed caption, I was like, he's going to do something.
I thought the glamour pan of Ahsoka was a little goofy, but funny. When she said something about you ever see a Jedi,
have you ever meet
like you see from his eyes. I'm like, no.
Yeah, you're like all boys.
All boys just alike. Exactly the same.
Right. But even before that, like she's introduced to Lux, and Lux's mom had asked him to help with the baggage, and Lux grabs Padme's bag, and Ahsoka absolutely refuses his help.
Right.
Like so she's still like doesn't she's not trusting. She still sees him as the enemy, and they move inside and they start discussing the war.
It's like she wants to find a way to take him prisoner, like now or something. You know, like waiting. Like, I'm gonna.
Well, she's so used to aggressive negotiations, right? That's. Yep. I mean, she even brings that up when Padme's telling her that she's going to teach her about this stuff, and she's like, "Well, it'd be really nice if we could do peaceful negotiations sometime." And like, she even goes into this one like guns blazing. You know, when she meets Mina, and she's like starts just like railing into her, like, "How can you possibly think this?" And Padme, you know, blanches at it, and then but Mina takes it in stride and like responds to her very nicely, and you know, kind of tries to bring her around to seeing things her way, to seeing things that, you know, there are differences of opinion here that can be just as valid on both sides.
And she shares the story about her husband who was killed, who was defending himself and was killed by clone troopers. So even that, I think, was one of the clinchers of bringing a bit of humanity into it for Ahsoka. Because it's after that story that she needs to go outside and get some air.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the tendencies we have in war, to glorify our guys and to take a face away from the people that we're fighting against. And even beyond that, the damage that's done by being aggressive in another place. Because this guy was just defending himself, right? He was setting up a base because that's, you know, he was trying to help out the planet that he was going to, which is what we see the Jedi do over and over and over and over again. And so he was there setting up the base, and then that planet was attacked by the clone troopers. And so he's defending himself. He's legitimately trying to protect himself from what's happening, and he's killed in the process. And we don't see the fallout. A lot of times when we're thinking about war, we don't see the fallout beyond just the casualties when a firefight starts, but all the bullet holes that remain in houses, all of the bombs that take out buildings that then have to be rebuilt, and the infrastructure that's lost, and the time that's lost, and the effort that's put into trying to fix the damage that's done by the war, right or wrong, doesn't matter. That damage is happening. Even with a focused purpose, you're still damaging something or someone, and there's a fallout from that.
Yeah. I went to World Youth Day in Krakow a couple of years ago, in 2016. And one of the things that we were able to do was we were able to go visit Auschwitz. And I mean, that was such an impactful and sobering experience to walk through that. And to see the result of what happened in World War II, and, you know, to hopefully prevent that sort of thing from ever happening again. And it sort of just brought home something that you read about in history books, or you see on the news. But this is a very real thing that happens in the world.
Yeah. Well, and I was just thinking too, and I'm trying to think. I don't think I mentioned this. I'm getting confused a little bit because I missed the episode. I wasn't able to make it the night that you guys recorded a while back, talking about some more of these war themes and that sort of stuff. But I listened to it. So, because it's just bizarre. So like now, like my only context for like Secrets of Star Wars is being in these conversations with you guys. So I sometimes forget. I was like, was I there? But I don't think I mentioned it with you guys. But if I did, I'll just say real quickly, you know, the other questions that can open up with the long-term effects, like Thomas was talking about too, is you know, we had a really very interesting debate in one of my classes a few years ago, considering, and it was something a student brought up. I'd never thought of it. And he asked, if a soldier plants a landmine, you know, as part of what they're doing, and then, you know, whatever, you know, he goes on, he dies, he lives, whatever, and then something happens where basically that's not discovered, because it happens all the time. There's still people being killed by unexploded ordnance from World War I in France every now and then, you know. And he said 1,000 years from now, someone steps on that landmine and they die. Is the guy who planted it somehow guilty for that person's death? And it led to a really fascinating conversation about how our judgment works, you know, because it takes into account all of the lasting effects, you know, of everything we ever did. So, like, I firmly believe, the more I think about this, that none of us can possibly comprehend the real toll of every sin we commit, or every just decision we make. And right. So I guess what I'm saying is, it's causing me to reflect more to not be so dismissive about, like, well, we just got to do this. We got to do this thing right now. Well, do we? Like, have we tried harder? Or have we tried hard enough to find another way? Especially if it's war. And that's certainly what I see the church always talking like that, and then some people don't like that, but that's why,
Yeah, and that brings up just a point of what happens when we choose and act. That when we make a decision and do something, we're affecting some change outside of us in choosing to do whatever it is that we do, but we're also affecting change within us. Mm-hmm. And that's the whole idea between virtue and vice, is that the more you practice virtue, the more you're exercising that muscle to do what is right. It's changing you. It's making you a more virtuous person, and every time that you choose to cut corners, or you choose to, make the ends justify the means, you're becoming a more vice-filled person. So it's not just this one decision it's got to have one effect on someone down the road. No big deal. No, anytime that you make some sort of selfish act, it actually makes you a more selfish person, or vice versa, selfless, if you choose to act selflessly. And we always have to remember that in just trying to be a holy and virtuous person. And especially in these kind of situations, like, what kind of man are you going to be, or what kind of woman are you going to be?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I think you see Padme doing the right thing in the turn there, where she's putting out good into the world, and she's rather than propagating this concept of war, she's saying, let's try and let cooler heads prevail, and let's see if we can talk it out. Let's see if we can have a diplomatic solution that maybe everybody can be happy with. And if we would just sit down and do that, maybe it would work.
Which is exactly why I loved how she kind of got through, like, okay, to say nothing of fiscal responsibility, what about moral responsibility? Mm-hmm. And yeah, she's kind of that model for which we're seeing that played out. So we have then an encounter between Ahsoka and Lux, and that's kind of what we were talking about a little bit earlier, where they realize that each other is the first Separatist, or the first Jedi that they've ever seen, and they both sort of, I think, finally come to this realization that they're not the evil that they believed would be in the other. And Padme and Senator Mina are talking and disagree on Count Dooku. Mina admires him as a leader. Padme, of course, does not. But they agree for the need to stop the war. And I think they are on the same page when it comes to the moral issues that we've been talking about. And so Padme tells Mina about the state of the Senate and the Senate's potential hesitation to continue funding the war, and tells Mina that if the Separatists give an olive branch of peace to the Republic, that she believes that the Republic would agree to negotiate. And then we have a very fascinating scene with the Separatist Parliament. I don't know if we've seen that before, but it was the first time that I saw it. So
that's the first time it appears.
Okay,
yeah. And I think it's one of the only times that it appears also, because it's very. It gives you an insight to the fact that they're operating very similarly to the Republic.
Right.
And I liked how different the aesthetic was. Like, it looked very much like kind of British part. You ever see the movie Amazing Grace? It really reminds me of that kind of era.
Right.
Just it had that look.
Right. And so I was definitely kind of shocked in a way about it, because the movies just imply that Count Dooku is the leader.
Right.
And so you just assume a tyrant. So the fact that, I mean, it's still him and Palpatine are totally, pulling the strings on everything. But it was interesting to see him kind of set up this vote for whether or not the Separatists would offer this peace negotiation offer. And so they do that because Mina proposes that to the Parliament, and the Separatists agree to open peace negotiations. And we have then a scene again with the Trade Federation, the Techno Union, and the banking clan all completely scared out of their minds that this is going to actually work and stop the war and stop their profits. And one of them says, and I wrote down the quote. He says, we need fighting to feed the machine and our profits.
And I heard the song War Pigs in my head. It was just going right there. I was like, yep, that's it. But, I think that's a sentiment that the 1990s and early 2000s, like, really ingrained in our generation, growing up. The sense of, like, this just constant war, feel of, like, everything's just kind of feeding into this constant, continuous war. And I even had a friend who became an officer in the military because he was like, it's the one economy that's, it's never going to fail. You get a job in the military and you're going to be there for a while because there's always going to be something else that they're going to dig up for us to do.
Or a mortician. They'll never go out of business.
That's another one.
So, anyways, Count Dooku calms their fears and assures them that this attack on Coruscant is going to happen and defeat the peace effort. And back on Raxus, Padme and Mina say goodbye, and they both leave feeling hopeful that the war might end. And Ahsoka and Lux also leave as friends in that moment. And then we quickly go back to Coruscant, where things are escalating. The infiltrator droids are ordered to continue their infiltration by General Grievous, and they make their way through a checkpoint with a clone trooper under the disguise that they are tasked of being generator maintenance droids. And so they are pointed by the clone trooper towards the power generators. And then he makes some snide comment about droids and how stupid they are.
Stupid droids. My kids had a good laugh at that. They're like, they're not even going to check them. And I'm like, they did. The guys had the right, the droids had the right passes. Like, they're droids. These guys don't really think that much about them,
Yeah.
Which is weird because their biggest enemy out in the universe, in the galaxy they're fighting all the time are droids, but,
Yeah, but they don't look like that.
They don't look like that, yeah.
Transformers.
Right, yep. Padme then tries to convince Chancellor Palpatine to accept the peace offer that's coming at them by the Separatists, and Palpatine is just very hesitant and claims that whenever the Republic has reached out for peace in the past, they've been rejected. And Padme is firm in her conviction and argues that she believes it to be sincere because it originates with her friend. And so Palpatine reluctantly lets the vote go to the floor of the Senate. He still knows what's going on, so yeah.
Well, this is when we cycle back to the quote at the beginning of the show, where fear is a strong motivator, and that's you see that because at this point when they go for the vote, it seems like the Senate has lost the stomach for the fight. Like, they are all ready to throw in. Nobody's really ready to let the banking guild have this much power. It's kind of, they all see the writing on the wall, but they need that fear to drive them the next step, and that's what we see is that that rise of the fear.
Yep, exactly, because the droids arrive at the power generators, and they attack all the workers, and they kill all the workers, and the vote is happening concurrently, and many are willing to vote no on that. And then the droids detonate themselves, and they take out this large portion of power out of Coruscant, and that includes the Senate. And it's quickly determined that is indeed a separatist attack. And then calm heads are definitely not there in the Senate, and they just kind of escalate and are convinced that this was that the peace offer was just a way to lower the Republic's defenses in order to attack, and the Senate promptly decides to deregulate the banks and increase the war effort. So, and then the whole episode ends with Anakin reprimanding Ahsoka for her going too far in this whole situation and doing something illegal with the mission. And Ahsoka does remark that the politics of war are not as black and white as she thought they were, which is definitely, that's been what we've been discussing about the whole episode. So moving on to the second episode of this particular plot, I was trying to look up how much time has passed, and as far as I could tell, I think it's sort of within the same year. I tried to I found a timeline online, and because there obviously has to be some time that passed, but because the episode starts off with the first ever sanctioned meeting between the Republic and Separatists, and it is going to be held on Mandalore because that's neutral ground. And the episode starts with them meeting in Duchess Satine's chambers, and the Separatists they demand that Padme officially pronounce on behalf of Chancellor Palpatine that the Separatist state is legitimate. And that's really all that we see about that whole negotiation, that whole meeting, because Lux Bonteri walks in completely uninvited and surprises everybody there. And in that moment, he declares before the entire group that as a Separatist, he claims that Count Dooku murdered his mother, Senator Mina Bonteri.
Which is funny, because that was one of the hardest things for me to believe in the whole episode, was that they would just be like, yeah, come on up here, make a speech.
Yeah, just walk in. Here you go.
Who's this kid? No,
that's watching this show, I try and give it so much grace. I'm like, they didn't have time to set anything up for this. They just needed this thing to happen. So I could see, and when you do that, if you're able to do that, it makes some other things make so much more sense, because Lux looks like kind of a dork throughout this whole thing. And if you think about him playing a long game, right? Like, he's been, scraping boots and like making sure that he's in the right positions. He's going to be the one that's going to give this speech, and they expect him to come up and give the speech about how horrible it is that the war's taken his mother and all this kind of stuff. And then he gets up there and throws that out. Then everything else that he does actually makes sense. You're like, oh, okay. He's been working at this for a while. Not this was just some, half-cocked idea that he walked in with and was ready to go, and everybody just let it happen. Yay.
So that's a good perspective on it. You could, apply that to more than just this episode.
Yeah, that's how I try and watch this show all through, because it's 30-minute segments, and they're very in your face with the really heavy philosophical stuff, and everything's very quick cuts.
Yeah. So the Separatists take him away, and Ahsoka knows immediately that he's probably going to be killed, and Padme lets her go off to help discreetly. And Lux has a hologram encounter with Count Dooku, and Count Dooku denies involvement in the death of his mother, and then promptly orders Lux's own execution to join his mother. And during that exchange, we see Lux activate some device that he has on his wrist, which will play an important role later down the road. And that's when Ahsoka barges in and rescues him from the impending execution. And Ahsoka leads Lux past all the droid guards to her ship, and even has Republic troopers defend them, even though Lux is kind of objecting along the way and has some other ideas, but things are moving too quickly, and so he gets caught up and goes with Ahsoka to her ship. And they immediately take off and head into space, and Ahsoka checks in with Anakin, and who reveals that the peace negotiations have all but failed, and that they will look into giving amnesty to Lux in coming to the Republic. And that's when Lux is telling Ahsoka that he can't go with her. He already has a plan. He's not a Separatist any longer, but he also can't join the Republic, and reveals that his plan is to seek revenge for his mother by contacting a group on Karlak.
I love this whole build-up.
Yeah.
Like when you eventually see who it is, of course,
Right. Well, and Lux's own ignorance of who Death Watch really is.
Yeah. Well, but to be fair with him, he hasn't been involved in the war at all.
Right.
And Ahsoka has firsthand knowledge of these guys because she's had to deal with them. Or at the very least, Anakin's had to deal with them, has passed along the information to her.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So he sees in them an opportunity to seek what he's calling justice, but it's revenge. And Ahsoka decides that she can't go along with it, and so Lux stuns her and takes the ship to Karlak. When Ahsoka wakes up, she realizes that she doesn't have her lightsabers and orders R2-D2 to search for them and heads outside to encounter and confront Lux. And it's at that moment that Death Watch promptly appears. R2-D2 finds her lightsabers and comes out waving them around, which was
a little disappointed in him at that moment.
Yeah.
And the situational awareness of Death Watch, because somehow they didn't see it. You know,
right.
Like, got him. Okay.
Yeah, so I did some digging at this point just a little bit because Lux is talking with one of the members of Death Watch, who is a female. And it was after the episode that I was starting to look this up. That's Bo-Katan, who is Duchess Satine's sister.
I forgot that this was her introduction, I think. I was just checking Wikipedia. Yeah. So, yeah, I was like, oh, yeah, that's right.
So, the helmet is wicked.
Yeah.
Yeah. But also, I mean, there's of course connections to Duchess Satine, but Bo-Katan in Star Wars Rebels, spoiler alert here, she is ultimately the one who is able to reunite some of the clans with the Darksaber. And that's before the Mandalorian. All that we know is Bo-Katan has the Darksaber, and so we don't know what happens. So that,
and I feel like she didn't just hand it off to Moff Gideon.
Right.
I'm so mad. There's something happened.
I suspect we'll find out in season 7 of Clone Wars.
Mm-hmm.
So that was, once I realized that, I was kind of like, oh my gosh, I know who that is, which was exciting for me. So Lux tells Bo-Katan that he has the information that they are seeking, Death Watch is seeking, and he has to come up with a cover for Ahsoka. And they say that Ahsoka is betrothed to Lux.
I love that was Ahsoka's jump. That's the first thing that came into her mind. She just jumps in, oh, I'm his betrothed. What? Hold on now.
Yep. R2-D2 hides the lightsabers at this point and inside his droid casing, and Death Watch immediately grab him and Ahsoka, and they bring them all along with them to their camp. And as they drive into the camp, we see just how cruel Death Watch is. They're shooting and destroying those droids just for the sport of it. Of course, you can argue they're not human. They're not, but at the same time, they've done a good job of humanizing them, and it's sort of like, how do you treat your pets that are, like are you? Yeah. It was that sort of feeling that sure, their droids are droids, but still it reveals who you are and how you treat them. So they're just terrorizing those droids.
Which I don't know how necessary that was given the context of the rest of the encounter with them, because they've enslaved a local group, and then they like, you really didn't need to have them also shooting at droids. I mean, we get that they're pretty despicable by everything else that happens too. So this is kind of like overkill, in my opinion. Like walking into the camp and that's what you see. It's like, oh, okay, all right.
Yeah, the whole like, what's it called? Like the whole build up to the dramatic killing, of the innocent people in that village too. They just like, man, I don't know about that, but man, are they mean to those droids? I'm like, no, they're terrible across the board. Of course, they're doing that stuff too.
Yeah,
I guess
they're awful. They're awful on every account.
Although what I kept thinking though, I kept laughing because not laughing, but with the droids and stuff, I wrote down on my notes. I was like, man, Death Watch hates droids, And then I was thinking to myself, I'm like, maybe that has a little, that was probably fueled a little bit with young Din Djarin, I guess, with them. I don't know. There's not a whole lot of droid love with that particular sect of Mandalorians.
There you go.
Yep. So Lux and Ahsoka are brought into this tent, and they have a moment of just them two, and Lux reveals to Ahsoka that he has a holo trace device and that he used it to determine Dooku's location when he had that holo conversation with him earlier in the episode, and reveals to Ahsoka that he wants to have Death Watch help him kill Dooku out of a wrong sense of justice for the murder of his mother. Pre Vizsla walks in, and to cover this whole conspiracy thing, Lux immediately kisses Ahsoka, and Ahsoka then after that is forced to leave.
And go join the women. Go join the women.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's like, oh my gosh.
And he has no idea who he's dealing with. But Ahsoka goes. And Lux and Pre Vizsla have a discussion, and Lux wants to make sure that Pre Vizsla is resolved to kill Dooku. And Pre Vizsla reveals that he has a scar caused by Dooku and is resolved to kill him, and warns Lux never to question his resolve again. So I'm also assuming that was never shown, but Pre Vizsla has had some encounter with Count Dooku before in order to get that scar. So there's a bit of hatred there already.
Yeah, after serving after the issue with Kenobi, Pre Vizsla needed to regroup the Death Watch, and to do that, he joined forces with the Federation and was backstabbed by them. And when he confronted Dooku about it, Dooku then turned around and told him to get out, and was a better saber fighter than him apparently. So there you go.
Is that in one of the Clone Wars episodes?
I'm not sure. I think it was.
I thought, I can't remember what.
I'm
the
pretty sure
was.
it was in one of the Clone Wars episodes, but I'm not sure which one it was.
We'll probably get to it at some point.
Yeah.
So okay. So Lux hands over the holotrace device to Pre Vizsla, and Vizsla wants to celebrate because the information and he wants to kill Dooku, and so that's a reason to celebrate. And R2-D2 at this time is led to the tent with all the broken droids and is tasked to fix them so that Death Watch can use them again for target practice. That was a sad scene.
Very sad.
Yeah, to see battle droids begging R2-D2 to help them repair was, yeah. But R2-D2 is a trooper and does indeed help them all. Ahsoka is thrown into a tent with some of the other captured female locals. They're the Ming Po. And she meets Tryla, who is the granddaughter of the elder of that group, the Ming Po. And they basically tell Ahsoka that they are people who trust easily and were quickly betrayed by Death Watch. So, yeah, Death Watch is pretty despicable. During the celebration, the Elder arrives and accuses Vizsla of his crime, of taking advantage of them, and tells them that Death Watch is no longer welcome. And Vizsla is seemingly agreeable up at this point and tells the Elder that he will release all the female prisoners at sunrise the next day. And immediately in my mind, I was thinking, it's not going to happen. And yeah, surprise, surprise, it didn't. Because at sunrise, they encounter the Mingpo Elder, and immediately Death Watch, dramatically kind of jetpacks around the village and onto the buildings, and they surround the entire people. And then Vizsla gives the granddaughter back to the Elder and immediately draws the dark saber and kills her. And then he orders Death Watch to kill them all.
All because you should never let the weak tell you what to do.
Yep.
And that to me was like kind of, I don't know, it's indicative, I guess, of the stance that Death Watch has kind of moved to. But it's also kind of dark for a show of this caliber where you've got, I mean, there are some characters that do get redeemed out of Death Watch, and that we go on to see as good guys, and to be part of that sort of an organization and then to come back from that it's a tough sell, in my opinion.
Well, and I keep wondering about, the connection, of course, to the Mandalorian, the show, which, again, my mind keeps going there, but it'll be interesting to see, because in one sense you can see some things that make sense, with him being potentially raised or at least strongly influenced by them in his youth. But just, I don't know, like if you put the scene when you finally get the full reveal in The Mandalorian of it's Death Watch that comes to his rescue, this heroic rescue, next to this episode. I mean, it's like,
yeah,
it's like running like an advertisement for like the Green Berets or something next to like an Al-Qaeda training video. It doesn't seem to match up, like very different. So it'll be interesting to see how that, like, did he break with them, or I don't know. Are there different, elements to Death Watch? He was part of this group. I don't know. It'll just be something I'm curious about at least.
Well, and there's probably some connection in the Mandalorian. One of the troopers was Paz Vizsla, so some at least of the same clan,
right?
Mm-hmm. And how did they break from this despicable nature?
And aren't the Vizslas, they're somehow connected with the Wrens too, I think, right? I forget the family tree, but I thought that was established in Rebels, but I'll have to go back and look.
Yeah.
And
then there's that, and it goes all the way back to the earliest Jedi Mandalorian as well. So
right.
So there's a long line of Vizslas there.
Right.
But I think it's interesting. It's interesting that, one of the things that Star Wars gets ragged on for a lot is that it's such a child's tale. It's such a child's tale. It's so simplistic. It's so like black and white. Like you have all these archetypes when you're talking about, especially the original 3 episodes. Is there is a good, there is an evil. They're definitely separate until the end when they kind of mesh together and mixed up. And then as the universe has expanded, we start to see more and more and more of these characters that go on a redemptive path, or that are really, truly evil that become good again, or that are redeemed from that darkness, or that struggle with the darkness, or that fall from the light. And there's all sorts of different gradations on that concept that really challenge these archetypes that everyone wants to stick to. The Jedi Council wants everything to be like order or chaos. That's all there is. There's no in between. Or, the Sith are all about bringing things down and being stronger and governing by fear. But then there's a lot of emotion attached to that. So there's a lot of also, there has to be love then in that as well. So it's a really interesting mixed bag when you get into this kind of stuff.
Yeah. And to tell it in a animated series is
right.
Is really cool.
Yeah.
So at this point, when they're starting to kill all the locals, Ahsoka finally begins to fight back, and she takes out, I think it was up to 4 Mandalorians, just like right away.
Oh yeah, the first thing she does, man.
Yeah.
Here, let me just do a quick flip and cut 4 guys' heads off. I was like, okay, awesome.
But in doing that, she totally revealed herself as a Jedi, and is contained and bound, and is ordered to be drugged back to the camp. And we then kind of swap back to R2-D2 and see that he has successfully fixed up all the droids, and they offer their help to R2-D2, and he asks them to help him rescue his friends. And back at the camp, Pre Vizsla confronts Lux about bringing a Jedi into their camp, and Lux tries to ask Vizsla to let her go, and Vizsla refuses and equates all Jedi with Count Dooku and says that they all must pay for their crimes against Mandalore. And so at this point, I was trying to just figure out what is he referring to, and so this is where I went down the rabbit hole. Like there's a clear reference here, and I was looking things up. It's a reference to the Old Republic and the Mandalorian Jedi War, and in canon, that was a series of conflicts between the Jedi and the Mandalorians, ultimately ending with Mandalore completely devastated, and the Jedi emerging victorious. But it leaves the surface of Mandalore completely scorched and lifeless. And then it clicked. That's of course why whenever we see Mandalore, we see that the cities are all contained in hermetically sealed dome structures.
Right.
So there is generational hatred towards the Jedi for all of these skirmishes and wars, and the fact that the Jedi ultimately prevailed but devastated Mandalore in the process. But this was also super prevalent or crucial in many of the fans out there. It's also referenced in Star Wars Rebels, and so in Trials of the Darksaber, Kanan remarks to Sabine that he says that the Jedi won the war with Mandalore, and so there's all these kind of references, and for those who have played, I don't know if either of you have played the Knights of the Old Republic, the Xbox
Knights of the Old Republic, great game.
Love that game.
Yeah,
there's a connection here to that game because that game revolves around kind of the aftermath of the Mandalorian Wars and kind of what happens. And of course, that is considered Legends, not canon. But it adds enough credibility in the canon world for all the fans who love those games to kind of piece it in there.
It's coming back out. Come on, they're getting ready to re-release some Old Republic stuff. So I'm looking forward to it.
Well, there's I'm pretty sure there's rumors right now of a Knights of the Old Republic movie being developed.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be cool.
That would be awesome.
I really hope that if it does go in that direction, either it references the game but not directly and it makes it canon, or if it does do things from the game, it's faithful to the characters that I do love.
As long as they have a droid that refers to all organic life forms as meat bags, that has to be part of what's going on.
Oh
there.
My gosh, yeah. So that was kind of a fun rabbit hole to went down. I went kind of a bit deeper, and I'm not necessarily going to share that, but there's some cool quotes from Dave Filoni on basing the Mandalorians on stuff that was in the video games and connecting it to the Mandalorian Jedi Wars and all that stuff, which was really fascinating. But I'll share the link with you guys, and we can share it with the listeners as well, because that was pretty cool. So at this point, he is Pre Vizsla is going to kill Ahsoka out of, again, a wrong sense of justice, but he calls it justice. And R2-D2 comes in and lets loose a ton of smoke and distracts them. And immediately I thought of Leia's quote from The Rise of Skywalker: "Never underestimate a droid."
Right.
Because R2-D2 is the one who saves the day and distracts them. And Ahsoka retrieves her lightsabers and gets into this fight with Vizsla and the Darksaber.
And by the way, guys, I blew it. I was getting my Ahsoka escapes mixed up. So
this is the one where she like immediately jumps out with the lightsabers.
Right. This was the bigger one.
Yep.
This was the more dramatic one. I forgot about the other one because this was so cool.
Yeah.
Either way, both is she reveals her Jedi agility and power. So the fight spills outside, and all the battle droids.
Well, I have to point out too, she puts up against Vizsla here, and that was one that gave Obi-Wan trouble. So she's at least as good a saber fighter as Obi-Wan, if not possibly better. And he had to cheat get out of that fight too. So there you go.
He was also, if I remember, wearing armor, and Ahsoka is probably in general younger and more agile.
This is true.
So
this is true.
Yeah,
they have different fighting styles too. So there's a lot of differences there. But
don't want to harp on Obi-Wan too much. But
I always laugh at Obi-Wan's, his reaction in Episode 2. That great line where the Anakin says to him, where he says, if you could rival Master Yoda as a swordsman, if you focus more. He's like, I thought I already did, and I just love you. And McGregor like, only in your mind. Like a little hint. So yeah, he's you get that scale there somewhere. But Ahsoka's, she's doing pretty well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the battle droids at that point are helping assist Ahsoka and all of them as they fight Death Watch. And Lux hops into the speeder, and R2-D2 joins him. And Ahsoka, in her battle with Vizsla, purposely sabotages his jetpack, and which he has to. Of course, he thinks that she missed, and realizes, of course, as Ahsoka points it out, that I didn't miss. And he has to drop his jetpack before it explodes, and that allows her to jump into the speeder and get away with Lux and R2-D2. And Death Watch chases them with their jetpacks, including Bo-Katan, and they kind of have this skirmish all the way back to the ship, ultimately ending with Ahsoka fighting off all the Mandalorians. And they get back to the ship and immediately take off. And once out in outer space, R2-D2 reveals that the escape pod has been activated. And that's where we have Lux and Ahsoka have to say goodbye again. And Lux tells her that he can't go with her, even though Ahsoka tries to convince him that they could work together. Lux decides to leave. And that's where the episode ends. Any thoughts.
I like coming back to the quote at the end of all of these. It's what this one was. In friendship, friendship reveals who you really are, or something like that. In friendship, you reveal who you really are.
Friendship shows us who we really are.
Who we really are. Yeah, and I thought that was a really good kind of on both of their ends. The friendship, the tenuous friendship between the two of them. They both really show their true colors, and it's she is. She's not trusting, but at the same time, she depends on people. And that's, I think she's good at balancing those two things. And you see that a lot in her relationships. Whereas Lux is kind of like too trusting and doesn't rely on the people, on the resources that he has at hand to get things done the right way. And so you see that opposite in them, but you see it also work together in the end to make a good friendship and make a good situation out of a bad one.
And to connect it back to the first one, you know, they the first episode that we talked about, they both saw each other as monsters and the enemy to begin with. And the fact that they were able to kind of see through that and see each other as persons and develop this friendship that brings them through this episode is just super important to human growth.
Right.
Well, you know, and the ongoing question of just them in the middle of this conflict, and I wrote in my notes, how much is peace worth? And, you know, Anakin's comment, you know, peacekeepers, and it's always tied to some kind of violence. And this idea of, is it just, and this is something I go into with my students a lot too when we talk about war and peace and the church's teaching on it, is that it's not enough for there just to not be any fighting. You know, like I've just laid waste to everything and all the bad guys are dead. You know, peace is not a negation of it, you know, of something bad. It's a positive reality. And I love that phrase. We can get into it more some other time, but, you know, Thomas Aquinas, and coming, I think, from Augustine's phrase, tranquillitas ordinis, you know, the tranquility of order, you know, or as one of my friends likes to say that old quote, a place for everything and everything in its place.
Yep.
Yeah.
You know, that everything is just in harmony, and, you know, there's something more to that. And we see this war before it's going on outside. This war is going on inside all of these characters, you know, so just like us. So I really like that about this show too, and all of Star Wars.
Well, I like the fact that it's, you see a lot of times the peacekeepers are not moving in this universe until there is a conflict. And that's the problem, is that they're not stepping up and taking care of these problems before they're a problem. And that's where we are called to action, you know, not just when the chips hit the ground and we, you know, really have to put up and protect people and all, but before that, to call for justice, to step out in faith, to challenge the system the way it is until it's right, and to make sure that we do that in a peaceful way, but also in an insistent way, with work and effort and self-sacrifice.
Yeah, we have to be proactive, not just reactive.
Right.
Awesome. Any other final thoughts from either of you? Since
we're going to go into the 7th season, and it's probably going to get a little more intense talking about the 7th season, I want to talk about a realization I had the other day.
Okay.
I was driving around, and I suddenly had this incredible, I don't know if I want to call it empathy for the Empire, or a kind of like realization about us as Americans. And I was thinking in the context of the Clone Wars, the end of the Clone Wars, everything shutting down, and you especially see it in these 2 episodes where the 2 planets that really set themselves out as being against the war are Alderaan and Naboo. And Naboo's kind of off limits because it's the Emperor's home planet as well. But Alderaan is the one that takes the brunt of that in the end, when the fighting won't stop. And I think we think of these as 2 separate wars, but you really have to think of the end of the Clone Wars as the beginning of the Star Wars that we know from the original 3. And that moment where they blow up Alderaan, stepping back, you can totally justify that. This rebellion is started. It's going to keep this war going on for years, possibly. It's going to cost more money, more lives. It's a terrorist organization, essentially. They're not going to give up. How do we strike them in a way that stops the fighting? And then you look at World War II and how we ended the conflict in the Pacific. And you go, we attack a peaceful place and completely obliterate it and show our overwhelming power so that no one else stands up, so that the fighting just stops and it's done. And when I was thinking about that, I was like, oh my gosh, that's terrifyingly accurate to being almost exactly the same situation. And we see it as a great ill in the movies because we're watching it from this bureaucratic, back point from the rebel standpoint. And it just struck me. I was driving around the other day and I was like, wow, that's intense. That's like a really this movie series is so much deeper when you really take it and put it up against the real world.
And I think any good story is, fiction, science fiction, whatever. You use it almost as a mirror to what we know as real life, and so we set all this stuff in a fictional world to play these things out, but really it's kind of a running commentary on our own human experience.
Yeah.
And both of those, the destruction of Alderaan, but also the bombs in World War II, both of those are exactly what we talked about earlier, is that it's the attitude that the ends justify the means. Right. And that is morally wrong, because you're doing an evil in order to try to cause a good, which is wrong.
Yeah.
So good insight there. Mike, anything from you?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Well, on that sobering note, we will wrap this up.
I was like, I don't have anything to add.
Yeah, sorry to end on that one, but I just wanted to get that out because I know when we get into season 7, we're going to be talking about season 7.
Oh yeah,
so.
Yeah. No,
I'm really excited for that.
Well, cool. That's it from us on this episode. And so, listeners, what did you think of these episodes of the Clone Wars? And you can, of course, email us or comment on our Facebook or Twitter page to let us know. And you can email us all feedback at starwars@sqpn.com. And you can find StarQuest on Facebook at facebook.com/StarQuestMedia and on Twitter at SQPN. Be sure to like the Facebook page and follow the Twitter feed to keep up to date on what we are all doing and as we release all these fun and fantastic and informative episodes. We'd like to take a moment now and thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create The Secrets of StarQuest, including Jim H., Monica V., Lucas D., Russell T., and Joe S. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue The Secrets of Star Wars and all the shows that we do here at StarQuest. And so please, if you can, join them. And you can do that by going to sqpn.com/give. Also, of course, be sure to subscribe to the show to get all the recent episodes and to follow us as we continue this journey. And you can follow us at find the show in Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, iHeartRadio. But you can also find us on the SQPN YouTube channel. You can also find any and all previous episodes of The Secrets of Star Wars by going to sqpn.com/Star Wars. And so we will be back in a couple of weeks when we will begin our review of the Clone Wars Season 7. So we're going to take a brief break from looking at the Mandalorian lore and culture, and we are going to jump and follow the new season as it streams. So our first episode in a couple weeks will be a review of the first 2 episodes of Season 7, and we will be taking them in 2-episode chunks throughout the season as they continue to stream. So be sure to watch on Disney Plus and keep up with the new season before then tuning in and listening to us talk about it. So until then, Thomas and Herho, thank you for joining me and sharing the secrets of Star Wars.
It's been a pleasure.
And Mike Creevy, thanks for joining us this evening.
Always a lot of fun.
And once again, I'm Father Andrew Kinstetter. Thank you for listening to The Secrets of Star Wars on StarQuest.